Yo, it's Johnny King. Thanks for joining me on another episode of the Becoming Kings podcast. And in my virtual studio today, I have Mr. Miyagi. He is my spiritual teacher. I am Daniel LaRusso whenever he and I meet. Chris Dumler, what's up, man? How are you?
What's up, man? It's good to be here.
It's
I feel like we need to start sanding some floors right now, painting
I
fences and stuff.
yeah, I feel like behind you, a lot of people like put up fake, you know, backgrounds, but you actually
Yeah,
have what looks like could be your dojo back there.
yeah. It is my dojo, actually. That's kind of what it. Actually, this is in a way where a lot of things have gotten started for me. This back scenery right here, and I kind of love sitting in front of it.
I mean, just like creatively, just a lot of inspiration coming back
Yeah,
there.
yeah, creatively. I ended up in this is an Airbnb. I live in this weird kind of lifestyle right now where I ended up in New Zealand just before the country locked down,
Yeah,
and the owners of this place and I became friends, and so I've just kind of stuck around here most of the time, and it's this has been the place.
it's beautiful, man. It's so pretty.
Yeah.
Well, it's been fun. Chris and I, we go back. You went to school with my older brother, more or less, right? And then we
Yep.
got into pranking people late at night to you were my counselor at camp, to working with my bro and my dad back in the day, to
Yeah. Yeah, we've got good history, don't we?
yeah, we got some history, and then throw a 15-year hiatus or so in there. But I want to get into what more of what you do, and we're going to talk about mindfulness and meditation and
Mm.
so many different things. But why don't we talk about, just because I think it's going to connect. You reached out to me initially months ago because I wrote a couple of posts when I was really struggling over this COVID year of like apathy, so much repressed anger, being just kind of like a nice guy that never really lets, any anger out. I was starting to really feel, not starting to feel, I've been feeling it all my life, but I was starting to vocalize the repercussions of that type of behavior on myself and on relationships and on my work and on my motivation. And I just thought it was really, really um, just loving and thoughtful that you reached out and said, hey, tell me about what's going on, and maybe I can support you in one way, which has brought us all the way to this moment. But what did you see in my message enough on social media to want to reach out?
Yeah, I remember that explicitly. Like, it was super serendipitous in a way because I had been taking a hiatus from social media for, I don't know, a year or more at that point. And so I was rarely ever on,
Mm,
but there was a coaching group that I'm a part of that uses Facebook, and so I happened to be on there, and I saw a post that you wrote, that the one that you're describing, and I had no idea really what you were up to or what you've been doing, but it just resonated with me, and sounded similar to some of the things that I had been experiencing, and I had basically been having a lot of success with an approach to mindfulness meditation that was life changing for me.
mm.
And so I had this thought like, hey, maybe someone like Johnny would be curious about this too. And that's what was the sort of catalyst to reach out and say, hey, let's talk about this and see what happens.
Yeah, I appreciated you did so much, just because and as I was starting to post and vocalize more of that, which I've not really, in terms of being vulnerable on social media, I've been, and on my podcast, I've been vulnerable up to an extent, right?
Mm.
Well, then this year, 2021, I finally was like, enough is enough. I need to kind of really put out there, because and once I did, people were like, really? Like, I would never have thought you'd be quote unquote human, like, oh, I didn't know that you had emotions like that. And I'm like, yeah, I can hide it pretty well. But I think it's good for us to get into this kind of conversation and why this is such powerful work, because on different episodes I've talked about how powerful for me this year, especially meditation has been, and again, mindfulness, being present, just really being very conscientious of how my body feels, where my emotions are, what's coming up. And I'll tell you, 10 years ago, I would never have been able to even to begin thinking about having the conversations that you and I have. Um, and so I want this conversation to be applicable to anyone, but I do feel like for men who think that they're really, really frustrated, maybe they are shut down, they're numb. If they think that, oh, getting that promotion or getting more money in the bank or retiring or getting to some place and then they'll be happy, uh, I think there's also part of them that really knows that's a lie, like that's just a false dream. So,
Yeah, it's a convenient dream.
yeah,
It's one of these things that I think we've all been told, especially in American society, that we can, um, if we work hard enough and follow the script, there's something shiny at the end of the tunnel.
yeah,
And we've heard the opposite too, right? We all have the uh, metaphor of the hamster on the treadmill, so we know that that's a thing too. But we don't
yeah.
really always have an answer or an alternative to that. And I love that you're talking about these things. You've been doing this on your podcast for a while now. This whole idea of being more conscious. I think you did a show with John Fuller. Is that his name?
Yeah.
Your body was just
Yep.
doing something on conscious, kind of living more conscious life. And I think that's
Mm-hmm.
that's very similar to what I've been thinking about a lot and putting into practice.
Tell, if you will, kind of backtrack and let's get into, a little bit more of what you do. You're a mindfulness coach, correct?
That's right. Yeah, I'm a mindfulness coach. Technically, if you want to throw certifications on there, I'm a level 2 mindfulness coach certified through
Yeah.
Unified Mindfulness, which is an approach to mindfulness developed by a guy named Shinzen Young, who's now focusing on a lot of research. There's a lab at the University of Arizona called the SEMA lab where they're exploring mindfulness using ultrasound. A lot of major universities exploring mindfulness right now. It's kind of the hot topic, right? Mindfulness,
Mm-hmm.
it's showing up everywhere. It's funny. I walked through the grocery store, and I think there's like 4 or 5 magazine publications that are all mindful something, right? Mindful eating, mindful living, mindful whatever. So it's a pretty hot topic right now. But I think sometimes that causes some confusion as well. But
I'd be curious to hear, how did you get into, or how did, your previous life experiences and the evolution of Chris Dumler bring you from Tinder to mindfulness?
yeah, well, the same way if anybody gets anywhere, YouTube.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. Well, sort of just kidding. Not really. I mean,
Yeah.
I started getting into, I've always been, I've always had this. All right, we're gonna get all matrixy for a second. Like I've always had
Yeah.
this feeling that something was a little bit off or not optimized in my life, right? Maybe life in general. I'm not sure, but
Mm-hmm.
and so, going down the paths that a lot of people go through, especially as the internet has developed, like how do you be more productive? How do you be happier? How do you employ some of these mind hacks? That was always an interest to me. And then I came across a guy named John Kabat-Zinn, who was sort of one of the early people that started to apply a lot of research to mindfulness in the U.S.
Yeah.
And he was talking at a bunch of startups and things like that was kind of interesting to me. And so it got me into the practice a little bit. He had a good approach to mindfulness where he defined mindfulness as paying attention on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally, and that sort of stuck. But figuring out ways to practice mindfulness in a way that stuck or was consistent was actually pretty challenging, and so it was more of a dabbling for a really long time,
Yeah.
on and off. Um, led to some breath work and exploring that area. You got Weinhoff, and methods around breathing that I thought were pretty interesting.
Totally.
And so I was focused a lot on that area. But really, what happened, all this kind of practice stuff. I've been living this life experiment over the last 2.5 years now, almost 3 years, of living a life that's kind of separate from a lot of attachment. And in this process of kind of feeling that I was getting closer and closer to happiness, I was sitting in this ideal place in New Zealand during the pandemic, probably one of the safest, happiest places during that time in the
Yeah,
world.
true, true.
And and yet something was still missing. Like all my needs were met, like everything was checking the boxes, but something still wasn't really right.
Mm.
And so I was sitting out back here one day,
In the dojo.
and in the dojo,
Yep.
and
Yep.
this is actually not my first trip to this particular place. So
Yeah.
this was a prior trip, and behind me, back through that foliage, there's actually a river that runs through, and the sun rises up over the mountains behind me. And so I was sitting out there, um, practicing some meditation that I was using the same way a lot of people use, which is the app called Calm. Right? There's Calm and Talkspace, all these apps that are now introducing people. And so I was listening to a meditation, and this meditation was a guest meditation I think I just found or stumbled on, called
Mm-hmm.
Mindfulness for Daily Life. And I was like,
Mm.
all right, that sounds cool. I kind of need that. And as the sun's coming up and the water's flowing and I'm kind of in the zone with the noise canceling headphones on, this guy Shinzen says, okay, we're gonna do this meditation with our eyes open today, and this is mindfulness for daily life, and we're actually going to pay attention to all of these things that are happening. So it's about employing this to your everyday
Mm.
scenario.
Mm.
And as ideal as this situation was on the surface, and it is certainly something to appreciate, I had this nagging feeling that I wasn't really putting mindfulness to work in a realistic way, right?
Mm.
Of course, mindfulness is going to be good in that scenario. Mindfulness is going to be great when you got the noise canceling headphones on and everything is perfect. But
Yeah.
what's mindfulness like when you've got to deal with a hostile relationship, or you're sitting in traffic, or you're trying to communicate with somebody that you love and you're just missing the mark, or
Totally.
you're trying to perform your best, in your sport, uh, and your concentration is all over the place. Like that's that's the real scenario, right?
Where the rubber
That's
meets
the
the
real
road.
scenario.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the rubber meets the road. And
Mm.
so I had this kind of realization that I wanted to change things and start to learn to put this into practice in a way that could be deployed in an instant anywhere. And that had to go beyond the app. That had to go beyond sitting in a perfect, location. That had to go beyond a lot of these factors that were making me feel restful and calm, but weren't leading to happiness in the real sense of the word. And what I mean by that is this idea of happiness. There's two kind of ways we can pursue happiness. One is happiness that's dependent on conditions, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I make all that money, I've got that beautiful life, that beautiful car, all this stuff out here, dependent on conditions. And that does bring about some happiness, I think, for a little bit of time. But there's another way to find happiness, which is happiness independent of
Mm-hmm.
condition.
Mm-hmm.
And that was pretty appealing to me. So it may be a long-winded way of explaining this journey, but that's really what got the ball rolling for me. And I dove in pretty deep and then started pursuing this approach to mindfulness and learning those techniques. And more importantly, I was interested in sharing with others because I started to see some effects in a relatively short period of time with some consistent practice. Um, stumbled on what I felt was some secret sauce, and somewhere post that is when I reached out to you and said, hey, let's chat about this and see if we can align our different approaches to this together and see where they fit.
Well, I think it's beautiful because it mirrors a similar journey that I've been on, which it's not that everyone goes on this journey, but I do feel like sometimes, um, yeah, just seeking that carrot, in pursuit of that. We're like, you know, dogs on a track chasing a fake rabbit on the inside of a track, and thinking that once we get there, then we'll be happy. And if anything, it's exhausting. It's never ending. We're seeing I feel like I see my life, passing me by, and not a ton of experiences or fulfillment to where I'm proud of the life that I'm living, you know? So then it makes
Yeah.
me think there's got to be a different way, because this doesn't work. Yeah, like I'll get the new iPhone. Cool. This makes me happy for 24 hours, and then I'm like, cool. It's now just it's just my phone, right? So the things um just don't lead to lasting fulfillment. And so that's why I feel like the whole topic of mindfulness is really good, because similar to you, whether I did the what's the other app, that's so Headspace app, for a full
Headspace, yeah.
year, and I did it,
Hmm.
but I would often just check it off, and I don't like check it off the list, the to-do list, and I wouldn't feel like it had lasting effects throughout my day. And I still fall on this don't into this trap, don't get me wrong, of thinking like, okay, I got to carve out half an hour to an hour worth of meditation, because that's kind of how I prefer to do it, but it's just like, yeah, I'd love to work out for an hour and a half, but if all I got is 15 minutes, that's certainly better than nothing, right? So the micro hits that we've been talking about, that you've been coaching me with, I think is really, really relevant, because it allows you to your point, have mindfulness and a daily practice where you can take 30 seconds, no matter where you are, if you're in traffic, or if you're, you know, in a meeting, at the gym, wherever, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. There are a couple of things that you touched on there I think are really useful to consider. I mean, one is, and even when I was talking about this idea of happiness and chasing the carrot, we often default to the big obvious things as maybe misdirection, like chasing the fortune or whatever. But
right.
it's often the subtler things that are really taking us off the path.
Mm.
We go, okay, I'm just going to pursue one more bit of knowledge, right? I'm going to chase one more thing that's going to give me the information that I need to be better in life. And we go down this rabbit hole of doing these things, thinking that if I'm a little bit smarter, or I learn a new tactic or something, that's going to make it that much better. And I think there's some risk in that. It's certainly a way, I think, to pursue things, and maybe it does lead to some insight. And I'm not suggesting that that needs to be stopped, but it is something I think to be aware of. And mindfulness practice is one of those things that helps us say, okay, maybe I'm going a little bit off the rails here, and I can rein it back in. And then to this idea of being strategizing around the practice is something that's important in with me and my approach, and the way that I coach others too, is like, can we put a strategy in place that's going to fit what our lives are like, which for everyone it's a little bit different, but most people aren't filled with a sense of abundance of time where they can
Yeah.
practice for long periods of time and get that nice, stereotypical or whatever it is they think they're going to
Yeah.
get.
Yeah.
And so instead, it's like, hey, can we do some things like this concept of micro hits, where we're going to do little bursts of practice scattered throughout the day? It might be 30 seconds. And a lot of people are doing this already, right? You go for that nice nature walk, and you're paying attention to the way the lake looks, or the breeze through the trees, and you stop for a moment and you're like, I'm really feeling something here. I'm connecting. I'm paying attention. I'm all in on this experience. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that is mindfulness practice. People are doing things a lot. I was talking to a woman the other day who's got a practice. She's got a newborn baby, and she's just feeling this connection when she's holding her child, breastfeeding, and there's this connection, and she's just soaked into that, absorbed into that. And I think there's something pretty special there. And if we can do that with some intention and maybe apply a little bit of technique, then we develop this skill that is retainable. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the that's the key is uh just like anything else is a lot of things that bring the lasting results to require consistency. They can be sometimes perceived as boring. It's like we were talking about offline. It's the basics or the fundamentals, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, you look at John Wooden, right? John Wooden, the winningest NCAA Division I basketball coach of all time, 10 out of 11 championships, and he credits all like what's the secret sauce? He's like, I just taught the fundamentals, layups and free
Yeah.
throws and proper shooting form and you know just the fundamentals. And I think that's at least in this day and age where so many of us are attracted to the shiny new things, versus just sticking with the tried and true. But it's kind of boring, and yet you can get consistent results out of it. So how does that apply to kind of the mindfulness practice in terms of the basic
Yeah, I think
practice?
it's definitely with what I've been thinking about is simplifying, kind of going back to these basics, building these basic skill sets. And I think mindfulness is a set of skills.
Mm.
This is one of the definitions of that unified mindfulness has for mindfulness. It's probably worth covering. Mindfulness means a bunch of different things depending on the context and who you're talking to. But the definition that we work with is mindfulness is a set of three attention skills, and those are concentration, clarity, and then something called equanimity. Basically, the ability to concentrate on, focus on what you want to focus on. Clarity being the ability to know what it is you're concentrating on and what you're focusing on, knowing the difference between something you look at, you see, or mental talk, something you hear inside your head, knowing the difference. And then equanimity is this idea of being able to welcome and allow any experience to kind of come and go without this need to push it away or pull it. Contrary to popular belief, mindfulness or meditation isn't always pleasant, right? Like the idea is like we're going to sit there, and we're going to get relaxed, and for some people. That's the case, and depending on how you practice, you can use techniques that are intended for that relaxation. But mindfulness practice overall can be pretty turbulent and sometimes not all that pleasant. But by developing the skills to be okay and non-judgmental and allow some things to surface as they're going to surface, is a part of that practice, and that's part of that building that basic structure for dealing with anything that comes to our experience, anything we're going to perceive through our senses. Um, that's mindfulness.
I feel like that can be a challenge for a lot of guys because I mean, human beings in general, obviously we love to control. I think that's probably our greatest addiction in this human experience is trying to control things that we can't. But especially for men and the ego, I'll just speak for myself. Like there's times where I just don't want to surrender. I don't want to relinquish that control that mindfulness kind of requires for there to be any growth in it. And that probably was what kept me from making a whole lot of progress when I was doing Headspace for a year, just because I was like, I'm trying to control the process and then getting frustrated because I think it should be working out a certain way versus just surrendering. And that has to be one of the harder things to do literally is to just sit down and meditate, whether it be for 5 minutes or 50 minutes. It's like just surrender to, because I feel like I got to get all this stuff done.
Yeah, maybe, but I would take even a step back and say that the mindfulness practice is recognizing this idea that you want to control. So you don't have to make these things go away. Like mindfulness is not, like, it's a little bit out of the scope of mindfulness to be um, a tool for explicitly changing behavior, but it does assist in that process. And so, if you have this tendency to control things, the one of the first steps in mindfulness practice is okay, let's see if I can pay attention to when I want to control things, and then control them if you want to. Like there's no dictated way that you have to do this or that. It's, can you be aware of these things that are happening, and then you can respond to them however you decide to, right? Rather than being driven in this unconscious way or not being aware of what's happening, and then just reacting or dealing with whatever the result of that is.
So
So
less judgment from the standpoint of this is right and this is wrong, and more
yeah,
just slowing down enough to acknowledge what you're working with, and then to decide from that standpoint, from that decision
yeah.
point, right?
Yeah, most mindfulness practice, not all, but a lot of meditative practices in general are observational in nature, right? You're paying attention to some sensory experience, so something that you see internally, in your imagination, memory plan, fantasy, something that you hear internally, self-talk, songs stuck in your head,
Mm-hmm.
and something you feel internally, some emotional body type sensation, as well as the external, complements to these, the things you see with your eyes, your ears, and you feel with your skin and your nerves. So like we kind of break things down into this real simple way. We incorporate taste and smell into this feel category. It's just a little bit easier, but having a sort of complete way to identify the sensory experiences that we're having, being able to break those down and observe them, and then be able to do that in real time or close to real time. Like that's the skill, right? Like if you can get to this point where, a lot of us, for example, I'll give you a personal example. So in my life, one of the things that I run into a lot is this frustration. Like when I've got a lot going on, and I start to get this feeling of overwhelm, anxiety. It's like super frustrating. I want to get things
Mm-hmm.
done. Maybe I'm scattered. I don't know where to start, or I don't know where to finish. Whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
One way to go through life is that frustration just is just a part of the process, and you just kind of like burn it out until you give up, or you get somewhere where you feel like whatever it is just happened. But it's also can be pretty interesting if you can pay attention to that frustration starting to occur closer and closer to real time, so that you can be like, okay, I've got this sense that I'm getting a little bit frustrated here, and I know that that sense of frustration is tied to this idea of overwhelm. Let's explore that a little bit, break that down into manageable bits, so that I'm not just sucked into this giant knot of terribleness, right? So paying attention earlier and earlier in the process as you start to develop these skills, we try and move that needle closer and closer to this real time goal, so we can detect these things faster and faster,
Mm-hmm.
respond more skillfully, and that's you can imagine the implications of that. I mean, it's better in your relationships, your communication, how you respond in your sport, whatever you're doing.
I recorded a podcast the other day with a guy that used to fly. It's kind of the Top Gun for the Royal Air Force, and he had an instance where he had like a single engine catastrophic failure or something like that, and he just more or less talked about how his training just immediately kicked in. There was no fear.
Right.
There was no time to even think about what they were, I mean, fearing, right? Uh, and it just makes me think, as you were saying that too, that's the whole point of doing the fundamentals, the muscle memory of shooting basketball, as it relates to doing meditation and a mindfulness practice, is so that when the shit hits the fan, the training
Yeah,
kicks in, right?
that's a great example. Yeah, it's something that I tell people I work with all the time is like we train with the trivial and the mundane so that when the situations hit us that are not trivial or mundane, we're able to deal with them.
Hmm.
And that muscle memory component is certainly a part of that. And as you train these things, you do them over and over and over again. There tends to be a relationship with that, and that's the evidence that's coming in through a lot of this mindfulness research as well, which is showing that there is some dose dependency, meaning you do a little bit of meditation, you do a little bit of practice, it's good, it's better than nothing, you're going to get some benefit, but if you scale that up, um, it can have even more benefits. So trying to find, I'm not really sure whether I don't know if there's a point of diminishing returns there. There might be, um, but you certainly don't have to do loads and loads of time, but working out of that, starting off with some small bits and being able to throw that into daily life accelerates time. That's another thing that I'm looking for is, yeah, I've got some time to sit and go deep with my meditation practice where I'm going to sit, in formal practice and do some work. But I want to accelerate my practice also. So being able to throw some practice points into, when I'm out at the checkout stand or, I'm boxing or I'm doing something else, that kind of accelerates. It just adds to that time practiced,
Hmm.
and also leads to some cool discoveries and insights, which is a part of that as well. So yeah, you train in these different ways so that when you get into a situation where the shit hits the proverbial fan,
Hmm.
you're able to deal with it in a skillful way, and you don't have to spend a lot of time, or at least hopefully reduce the amount of time, uh, you know, running around in an
Yeah.
unpleasant situation.
Yeah. Yeah. Amen to that. Uh, Going back to what you said before, and I should know this since we've talked about it so many times over our sessions, but you said concentration. What's the second one?
Clarity, yeah,
Clarity and equanimity.
equanimity,
Okay.
sensory clarity, and equanimity. Those are the three attentional skill sets that we try to develop. They're the basics. These are the basic things like concentration. What you're describing, even with the pilot, is in sports we call it being in the zone, right?
Yeah.
You get into the zone, which is really just a way of describing a heightened state of concentration. You're so concentrated that you're able to deal with anything that's happening in your situation. And so trying to develop this state of concentration is a part of that process. And another thing that happens with concentration is the more concentrated we are, people tend to relax in that state. So
Hmm. Hmm.
high levels of concentration tend to lead to relaxation. It's kind of a nice little phenomena that happens there.
Yeah.
And then just that clarity component again is being able to uh, really take advantage, do a little bit of it's a little bit of an analytical process, to kind of evaluate what it is you're paying attention to, and to know when you're not paying attention to it. So, like the basic building blocks of a meditation, if you look at something like like breathing meditation,
Hmm.
that's what people are familiar with most. The idea is you have a focus object, in this case, your breath. You take a breath, you focus on some aspect of the breath. People are usually taught to focus on the sensation that comes through their nostrils, or maybe the rising and falling of their chest, or the out breath in some way.
Hmm.
You pay attention to that, and as soon as you notice that you're distracted, your mind has drifted off into thought or whatever. As soon as you detect that, then you bring your attention back to your breath. Right? That is essentially like doing a push up, or what they call in New Zealand a press up,
Hmm.
where you have a focus, you're distracted. All right, you got one aspect of that push up, one motion down, then you push you up. That back and forth between distraction, object, distraction, object. That's what strengthens your concentration. You build that concentration over time by doing that over and over and over again.
Hmm.
Um, so breath work, a lot of people don't realize that that's what they're actually developing, but they're developing concentration by doing that, and that concentration is bringing about a little bit of that rest. being able to detect quicker and quicker when your thought is pulled off into that distracted state. That's
Hmm.
part of that sensory clarity. And then being okay with that whole process happening and not being like, oh, I'm a failure at meditation. I'm always lost in thought and all these things that work against you is the equanimity component. There's no judgment there.
Mm, mm,
So in our approach, I use breath often as a example, but I don't do a lot of practice with breath, and this is because I don't really love doing breath work, to be honest, as much as I've done with it. I've had my nose broken so many times through various sports that focusing on my breath is not always comfortable. And so having other alternatives to focusing on the breath is really, really helpful.
mm.
And it turns out you can actually use just about any object um, as a focus object, whether it's a sense like a sight or a sound or something you feel.
Hmm.
Other common objects are mantras. People will count, or they'll have phrases that they say, or images that they turn to. There's I think it's what Turkish the whirling dervishes, or aren't they called whirling dervishes? They just spin. These people that just spin around and around and around. It's basically a meditation practice where the
Yeah.
movement is a part of that.
Hmm.
So yeah,
Well, what I liked about what you said too is I feel like that there couldn't be uh, many many more powerful practices, I think, at this in this day and age, than to increase your ability to focus. When every single guy I talk to says one of their biggest challenges is diffused focus and all
yeah,
these distractions and notifications, and some of that is practical in terms of turning those things off. But even still, I find myself, I'm working on something, and I just naturally I start to like struggle with like, okay, how am I going to write this? And I just swipe to the left just to look to the next desktop to see if I have any new text messages, that came in. And I'm
yeah.
like, nope, I swipe back, or I swipe back to see if I have any new emails, and I swipe back, or I swipe to look at my calendar to see. It's just like, just stay focused. God damn it, Johnny.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that is so my background before I got into mindfulness coaching full time was tech startups, and our goal was to steal your attention. In fact, when people start talking about businesses and then you start looking at competitors, the competitor startup, especially consumer tech companies, all these little apps that are on your phone, like the competitor is not other apps. The competitor is your attention as a consumer. That is
Mm,
the competitor. We're always competing for your attention. So technology is designed to help us, but it also works against us. Those little numbers that appear in every corner of every app on your phone is designed to create a reaction, a psychological reaction that compels you to go in and interact in some way. And
mm,
notifications are designed to do this. Email marketing, all that stuff is designed to steal your attention. And let me tell you, a lot of these big companies, they're working with psychologists that they know how to break you.
yeah, yeah.
it's out there. And so what do you do with that? Well, some of it is I mean, we can willpower our way through some of it, but and sometimes that's necessary. But I think a lot of it is just recognizing what's happening and getting better and better at recognizing what's happening, so that when you're swiping on that desktop screen, or picking out the new browser tab or whatever it is you're doing, at some moment you catch yourself and you're like, wait a second, something's actually happening here with my attention, and maybe I need to take a break, step away from this for a second, maybe do a quick breathing meditation, maybe just focus on something else for a minute,
Mm,
get out of that mindset and reset. Um, so we can go back in and be more productive and more concentrated, and then building up some skill just in general, which focusing on something for as long as you want to focus on it, being able to get in the zone so that these other distractions just don't, bother you as much, is part of the practice. It's hard. I'm not saying that this is easy, and it's why I call them skills, because these are things that we can develop, but they don't have to be random, and
yeah,
that's the important thing to remember.
yeah. I think making this whole conversation applicable is important. because the irony for me is that I focus so much of my time. My brain works in such a way that I'm always looking for like what's the most efficient way of doing something. Like, oh, I'm
Yeah.
going downstairs, so I should probably grab, this bag and the garbage,
Yeah.
and oh, I should grab that too, so I can only make one trip. And then there's other times I sit down, I'm so inefficient with the work that's actually important, you know, that would move my life along. But I'm really good about being efficiently cleaning my house or having all the things that are within my control. But it's like when I run up against resistance of some kind, then that efficiency kind of goes out the window. That ability to concentrate and stay in the game for me can struggle.
Yeah.
Uh, and I'm wondering if I mean, is that something that you feel like is pretty common? Do you feel like you've run into that? Do you feel like you've had other clients that have run into that? Or is that
Yeah,
just,
100% common. This is like like every human being on the planet, right? Like
yeah,
it's so rare that somebody is ultra concentrated and isn't distracted by you know all the things that distract us, whether it's technology or our kids or our family or our thoughts and our desires and all this stuff. Like this is all part of the process, and mindfulness practice is about recognizing these distractions or these things for what they are, being clear about what they are, and being okay with what they are.
right.
It's okay if it's okay if I want to be efficient and I want to go and do this stuff. I can pay it like I can have this experience, and I can be okay with that. And once I start to internalize or sort of understand when I go into certain modes or when things start to distract me or work against me, then I can take action with that,
Mm-hmm.
and I can move in a direction that maybe makes me a little more concentrated or a little bit more focused, or I could take steps to do this over time. It doesn't have to happen right away. I think just being aware of it is like a huge part of the battle, right? Like just knowing that it's happening is a huge part of the battle.
Yeah, and I feel like something that I've been really focusing on is just in every aspect of it, just minimalism, and realizing that just with so many, like literally going through my phone and eliminating 80% of the apps that I don't use,
Mm-hmm.
or just the stuff in my house, just getting down to the bare essentials of, you know, what inspires me. Otherwise, trying to keep things as yeah, I guess minimal and simple so that I don't get overwhelmed by things, because I can easily get overwhelmed and frustrated, like you were mentioning before. And so I've been working on, I think you talked about at the very beginning, kind of this like ditching attachment to
Yep.
things. I've been really working on that too, because we're all going to give it up anyways when we die. So why do I find, a sense of identity, attachment to things? And but how's that been playing a role in your life as you've been on this journey of letting go of your attachment to things?
Yeah, it's a strategy, and I didn't realize when I first started that experiment, or the experiment that I'm in right now. Like I didn't realize that this is a strategy. I didn't call it that.
Mm,
I thought it was a solution. So just some big picture stuff. In 2019, my wife and I quit our jobs, and we decided that we were going to get rid of all of our possessions. And so through selling stuff online and donations and giving things to friends, we got rid of nearly everything we owned, which
mm,
um, was quite terrifying, to be
sure,
honest.
sure,
Like like
sure.
letting go of things that have been carrying around forever, photos and journals and all these things that you might deem are really important. I had just decided for myself that I was going to let them all go,
Mm,
and collections of things and cool things from the past. Yeah, I just felt like it was time to let that go. And again, like I thought this was a solution where I was going to simplify things and move towards really getting more comfortable and familiar with what was important to me. And so the things I did end up keeping tended to be around those interests. But now for the last couple of years, we've been leaving. I mean, the things that I own fit into 90 liters of space, right? Like a suitcase and a backpack. And I look the same every day because I have about two outfits. But like it simplifies things um, in a way that has become really meaningful. As a part of this process, of course, I started to think about how much I was consuming. Prior to this, what that was doing to me, why I was doing it. I don't really love the why question. It tends to be a little bit judgmental,
Mm.
um, but thinking about what was happening in spending and stuff like that. So it's kind of a mindful practice that I was doing before I was doing it with any technique. But realizing that there was my use of buying things off of Amazon was really a form of control. I think most of the time, whenever I noticed that whenever I felt this is something that happened. I did a long trail called the Pacific Crest Trail. I didn't finish it, but I did most of California and then did the Oregon Coast Trail. So I was on trail for months, and there were a couple of times where we had a really tough year and things would feel out of control. And one of the first places I would go to is like Amazon because I'm going to buy some gear that's going to help solve me out of this problem, right?
Mm.
Put a drop to the next location, and it was sort of silly. Like I often didn't follow through with the purchases, but I started to notice that was what was happening. Was when I felt like I had no control, I would try and buy a solution or turn to some information or something like that. So having that realization was really helpful, and started shifting away from that as solutions and more towards sometimes sitting with a really uncomfortable problem, but working through it.
Yeah.
Just more matter of factly. I thought was really helpful. So that was part of that attachment thing, getting rid of everything and then moving on this. And now it's just kind of stuck. And now it's really interesting because I have a very visceral reaction when it comes to buying something now.
Hmm.
It's not a negative thing, but it is certainly like a really thoughtful thing. Like, okay, I'm gonna buy like this hoodie I'm wearing right now is actually relatively new. It's winter here. I had an old hoodie that I'd been wearing for the last like 6 years, and it's finally kind of worn out. And so I needed something new. But like I didn't agonize, but I spent like a couple of days before I pulled the trigger. Like it was on sale, right? It's got all the right ingredients. I'm pretty sure it's gonna last. It's got some good principles in terms of materials that are behind it and who made it and these things that normally wouldn't have been in my experience. Like I never really cared about much of that. Now it's actually far more important because I purchase things so infrequently that I want to make sure that it lasts and it's quality and there's some ethics behind it and things like that. So it's just a part of it, part of the change, something I'm going through, and yeah, I don't know.
Well, along those lines, I think something that a lot of guys and a lot of human beings in general could, along that same vein, is if they took just as much time and care and mindfulness in thinking through what they actually consume in terms of their nutrition, would have
Yeah.
a massive effect on the clarity of thought and their energy and everything else that attributes to their practices and their way of being in the world.
It's a part of it. Food is a big I would say a request. It's not my specialty, but I'm working with someone now who's dealing with food. Food is tricky in a way because there's a lot of there can be a lot of psychological things that are going on in there,
Totally. Yeah.
and so we work. What we're working on with this particular client is kind of sitting with the experience of eating and using location. Like, what do you normally eat? What's your normal eating like? And let's sit in that location and kind of have this experience before eating something. you know, are you hungry? What are the sensations you're feeling there? Are you,
Hmm.
if we start to move toward the fridge, you're imagining what it is you're going to eat. Is there salivating that's happening? Like what's going on? Like all these little things that happen that we don't normally pay attention to. And then we
Hmm.
come back with an item of food. Maybe we're going to actually taste it. Going to slow down the process a little bit, employ some techniques during the eating process where we can focus on the experience and really enjoy the thing that we're eating and not just like shoving it down. And then some post eating experience. Okay, what was that like? Is there this desire for more, that urge, like I'm not done yet, I gotta have more, or is that something that's subsiding? Like all of these kinds of things that go through that process of just paying attention to what happens in the environment as well as the actual consumption of food.
Hmm.
It tends
Hmm.
to be it's a really interesting exercise if anybody wants to try that. Just like as you get hungry and you walk towards the fridge, pay attention to what it is you're detecting in that moment. You know, it's pretty enlightening.
No, for sure, for sure. I've really enjoyed the conversation just because I do feel like, I feel like a guy could, if any of this resonates with, they're like, oh my gosh, this is a whole different world, a whole different conversation, and focus on something that is just kind of going on autopilot for them throughout their day, and they're always focusing on making money, providing, doing all the things that maybe they're not feeling super fulfilled. Kind of to your point, they checked all the boxes, things on paper looked really good, but there's still that sense of emptiness. I feel like a guy could get in contact with you and work with you in the same way that it'd be taking someone who doesn't know, haven't spent much time in the gym, you know, and so you
Yeah.
you you saddle up with someone who's pretty proficient in the gym and let them mentor you and coach you through the nuances of how the body works and how these tools or these various equipment, uses affect your body. And um, because I feel like to go about some of this stuff alone is it's a lot to take on. Would you say?
There are ways to do it alone. Like you pick up the app and you dial it in and you get some benefit there, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think for a lot of people that's the introduction that they're going to get to mindfulness. But
Yeah,
if
right.
somebody's ready to take that to the next level, where it is like you were feeling, like it's just kind of going through the motions, and it's time to
Hmm.
really optimize the experience that we're having in life so we can get closer and closer to this idea of happiness and what it really means, and appreciate the things that are going on around us, appreciate the people that we're interacting with, the experiences
True.
that we're having, and really identify those with a good sense of clarity. We make these little moments that we have uh, last a little bit longer, right?
Totally. Totally.
And so think about all the life that you get out of making a moment last twice as long. Like it's
Mm,
pretty amazing. You're
mm,
extending your life in a way.
mm.
So that's part of this practice. We just take it to the next level. Um, yeah, I'm working with people one on one in groups. Everything is over Zoom right now, but it's one of the nice silver linings of the pandemic is that we don't have to be in person
Yeah.
anymore.
True. True.
To get some benefit. I should. I'm not trying to say I don't love being around people. I do.
Yeah. 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 But it is pretty nice that you and I can do this and we keep, chatting on a weekly basis when you're halfway around the world.
It's pretty
Um,
amazing, isn't it?
yeah, it really is. It's kind of crazy what we take for granted, but um, if those wanted to just connect with you, what's the easiest way just to touch base?
Yeah, so I'm testing out this new brand, right? Talk about rebranding. Like I'm
Yeah.
testing it out. I don't know if it's gonna go anywhere, but people can reach out to me on Mindier, Mindier. So a little bit of being happier, being a little more mindful. Mindier.com.
Hmm.
If you go to Mindier.com, there's a link there to a Calendly page. You can pick a time. We can do a little 15-minute intro call, just kind of see where you are, what you want to do, and then we can schedule something if you want.
Cool. Love it. Mind
Also
your
reach me, Chris at Mindear. I'm Chris at Mindear.com. So
Chris at mindyear.com.
easy peasy.
Easy peasy. Well, thank you, man. Thanks for sharing your gifts and just again knowing like the stuff that you've gotten into prior to this is like one side of the brain versus the other side of the brain. But
Yeah.
you find yourself having that great balance of the analytical side, but then the uh, just the flow state, the meditation and the consciousness conversation and practices that I think do ultimately bring fulfillment, which is a lot of times what I'm talking about on the podcast, which is like, okay, we can achieve stuff, but then we also have to be fulfilled. And how do you balance those two things out? Because you can't just have one over the other. You could be a starving artist, but you're not providing for yourself. You got to do both. And so I think this
Yeah,
this
there's a little bit of
conversation
balance
is
there.
yeah, there's a lot of practical wisdom in this. So thanks for sharing with the guys, for sure. Appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to be here and chat about this stuff and engage in the life experiment. I mean, get curious and do cool stuff, you know?
Yeah, exactly. So there you guys have it with my Mr. Miyagi, Chris Dumler, all the way from New Zealand. He doesn't have the mustache or the Fu Manchu, but he's just as
Oh,
good looking
I've got
as Mr.
photos
Miyagi.
somewhere.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. I'm sure you do. But check him out, mindear.com, Chris at mindear.com. Thanks, brother. Appreciate you. And we'll
Yeah.
see you guys on another upcoming episode of the Becoming Kings podcast. Until we meet, have a great day.